The fastest way to destroy procrastination is to make the task so easy, so accessible, so convenient, and so appealing that it almost feels silly not to start. I overcome procrastination and achieve success by following two simple steps. Before then, procrastination can feel like a massive, unscalable wall standing in the way of my goals. We've all experienced it, the desire to get something done, but feeling like the task ahead is too overwhelming, too time-consuming, or too draining to even begin. It's like standing in front of this huge brick wall, knowing that on the other side lies the reward you want, but climbing over seems impossible. Maybe you need to study for an important test, work on a big project, or even start something as simple as cleaning your room. No matter how important or how small the task is, when procrastination strikes, it can all feel like you're facing a mountain. The key to overcoming this massive obstacle is not by brute force or sheer willpower, but by making the task so easy, so accessible, and so appealing that it almost feels silly not to start. It's about taking small, practical steps to lower the wall brick by brick, making it easier to climb over. And the beauty of this strategy? It doesn't require any major life changes or extreme self-discipline. Instead, you break the cycle of procrastination with a few clever tricks that make the task simpler and the reward more enticing. Here's how I've done it in two very effective ways. 1. Shrink the wall by making the task smaller. First, you don't have to tackle the whole problem at once. The reason that brick wall looks so intimidating is because we often view tasks as big, monolithic entities. Studying for an hour or working for several hours straight sounds exhausting, and so we avoid it. But what if you could make the task smaller, much smaller? Instead of aiming to study for an hour, set your sights on just 5 minutes. Yes, only 5 minutes. It sounds almost absurdly short, but that's the point. When the task seems tiny, it's much less intimidating. You don't need to muster up the same level of motivation or energy to start. It's like looking at a small wall instead of a massive brick one. Easier to step over, right? When you reduce the amount of work you need to do, you automatically lower the mental barrier that's stopping you from getting started. 5 minutes of work is so manageable that you're more likely to say, "Sure, I can do that." And once you've started, you might even find yourself continuing past those 5 minutes. This trick isn't about forcing yourself to work harder. It's about making the act of starting so easy that you naturally overcome your resistance. 2. Double the rewards to boost motivation. Now, making the wall smaller helps, but sometimes you need extra motivation to get you moving. This is where the second step comes in. Add rewards that make the task more enticing. Think of it as giving yourself a double whammy. Not only are you making the task itself easier to start, but you're also adding a layer of positive reinforcement to motivate you. Rewards don't have to be big or complicated. They just need to feel satisfying enough to create a sense of accomplishment. For example, I've found that creating a simple checklist or using habit trackers can be surprisingly effective. There's something incredibly satisfying about ticking off a box after completing even the smallest task. It's like a little hit of dopamine that tells your brain, you did something good. It might sound trivial, but these small, immediate rewards can do wonders for your motivation. When you know that there's a quick win, like checking off a task on your list, waiting for you, the idea of starting the work doesn't seem so bad anymore. You could also set up a reward system where you treat yourself after completing a task. It could be something as small as taking a 5-minute break, having a snack, or watching a short video. The key is to make sure the reward feels good enough that your brain associates the completion of the task with something positive. Over time, this reinforces the behavior, making it easier to start the next task. When you combine these two strategies, making the task smaller and adding immediate rewards, something magical happens. The barrier to starting the work becomes so low and the rewards so satisfying that it feels irrational not to sit down and do it. You're no longer trying to force yourself to work out of guilt or pressure. Instead, you've created an environment where it just makes sense to take action. It's like hacking your brain's natural tendency to seek pleasure and avoid pain. Imagine standing in front of that brick wall again. Instead of it being tall and foreboding, it's now much smaller. You don't need to strain yourself to climb over it anymore. And once you're over, there are small rewards waiting for you at every step of the way. Why wouldn't you want to keep going? Procrastination is a tough habit to break, but it doesn't have to be a constant struggle. By making your work easier to start and more rewarding to complete, you shift the dynamic in your favor. The wall becomes less intimidating, and before you know it, you've crossed over and are on your way to achieving your goals. So the next time you're faced with procrastination, don't try to fight it head-on with willpower alone. Instead, outsmart it. Make the task smaller and more manageable, and give yourself rewards that make the process enjoyable. It may seem like a small shift, but these little changes can make all the difference in turning procrastination into productivity. As you start using these strategies, you'll notice that the initial resistance you once felt toward tasks begins to fade. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, you'll approach your work with a sense of ease. You're no longer facing a huge wall that requires tons of effort to overcome. Now, you're looking at something smaller, more manageable, something you can step over with little energy. And once you're over it, you're immediately greeted with rewards that make the process satisfying and even enjoyable. The truth is, the hardest part of any task is starting. But when you make that first step ridiculously easy, it becomes nearly impossible to say no. You've probably experienced this before without even realizing it. Maybe you told yourself you'd only clean for 5 minutes, but an hour later, your entire space was spotless. Or perhaps you thought you'd just read a page or two of a book, only to get so engrossed that you finished an entire chapter. This is the magic of lowering the entry point. Once you begin, momentum often takes over. This is because your brain operates on patterns. When you complete a task, no matter how small, your brain releases dopamine, the feel-good chemical that reinforces the action. It tells your brain, hey, this feels good, let's do it again. So, by shrinking the task and adding quick, satisfying rewards, you're essentially tricking your brain into forming new, productive habits. But it doesn't stop there. Over time, as you continue to break tasks down and reward yourself, your tolerance for larger tasks increases. What once felt overwhelming becomes doable. For example, if you start with just 5 minutes of study time, after a few days, you might feel comfortable increasing it to 10 minutes, then 20, and eventually back to the full hour. The difference is, you've now trained your brain to associate work with positive feelings rather than dread or exhaustion. At the heart of this strategy is the understanding that procrastination isn't necessarily about laziness. It's often about fear of the unknown, fear of failure, fear of discomfort. When a task feels too big, your brain kicks into survival mode and tries to protect you from that discomfort by avoiding the task altogether. But by making the task smaller and adding rewards, you ease those fears. The task doesn't seem as risky anymore, and your brain no longer feels the need to avoid it. This approach works for more than just studying or work. You can apply it to nearly any area of your life where you tend to procrastinate. Want to start exercising but feel overwhelmed by the idea of a full workout? Start with just 5 minutes of movement and reward yourself with a small treat afterward. Need to declutter your house but can't seem to begin? Start with one drawer or one small section of a room, then check it off a list. These small wins add up over time, and before you know it, you've tackled a much larger project. Another key benefit of this strategy is that it builds self-confidence. When you're constantly avoiding tasks, it chips away at your sense of self-worth. You start to feel guilty, frustrated, and unproductive. But when you start taking small, manageable steps, you begin to prove to yourself that you are capable of getting things done. You create a positive feedback loop where each completed task boosts your confidence and motivates you to tackle the next one. The process is gradual, but incredibly powerful. You're rewiring your brain to approach tasks differently. Instead of seeing them as something to be feared or avoided, you start to see them as opportunities for small, satisfying victories. And the best part? This strategy is sustainable. Unlike relying solely on willpower or motivation, which can fade over time, this method is built on creating lasting habits that make procrastination harder and productivity easier. Let's be real. Procrastination isn't going to disappear overnight. It's a deeply ingrained habit that can take time to fully overcome. But with these two steps, shrinking the task and rewarding yourself, you can start breaking down that brick wall, bit by bit. Over time, you'll find that what once seemed like an insurmountable obstacle is now just a small bump in the road. Imagine how much you could accomplish if procrastination was no longer holding you back. Picture yourself effortlessly starting tasks, feeling energized by the process, and finishing them with a sense of pride and satisfaction. The good news is, this isn't just a dream. By making your tasks smaller and more rewarding, you can make this a reality. So, the next time you feel procrastination creeping in, don't let it take control. Instead, take action. Break your task down, give yourself a small reward, and watch as the wall of procrastination crumbles before you. You'll be amazed at how much progress you can make when you give yourself the tools to succeed. Remember, it's not about forcing yourself to work harder. It's about making it easier and more rewarding to get started. And once you start, you're already halfway there.